I want to talk about how to take notes for your research report. But before I can really do that, I want to explain what that even means. When you look in your textbook at that sample paper, what you see is several pages of really hard work that some student put in to pull information from 10 sources or more. When you look at that works cited page, there are a bunch of sources on there. All that information had to be gathered up and then put in the student's own words and then somehow organized into a paper that flowed logically and supported a thesis statement. That's not magic. It's hard work. And I want to tell you the most efficient way I know to gather information. So when I talk about taking notes, I mean that you're going to get out a pen or a pencil and you're going to write down the information that you're going to use in your research report. This slide just offers a preview of what I'm going to talk about in the presentation. I'm going to talk about why I have you use note cards. I'm going to explain why you should always have your thesis statement in front of you when you're taking your notes. I'm going to show you how to credit your source for every note card, how and why to put on one idea on each of your note cards, and I'm going to explain what each card should look like. Let's start with why we do it this way. You got to have some way to gather information, and you want it to be efficient. So when you're looking at your sources, you can't read and say, oh, now I know exactly how my whole paper is going to go. I know where every idea goes in my paper. It doesn't work like that. But you can look at your first source and look at your thesis statement and say, here's an idea that totally supports the first part of my thesis. I'm going to write it down. And here's another idea that supports my thesis, and I'm going to write it down. And you can efficiently gather information by looking at your thesis statement and putting one idea on each card. So the whole point of using cards instead of like writing in a notebook or typing it on a computer is that cards can be physically manipulated. You can move them around and organize them by subject. So when you're done taking your notes, you sort your cards out by subject, and each pile of cards becomes a section of your research report. And since you had your thesis statement in front of you the whole time, you're probably going to have a pile of cards for each piece of your thesis statement, each element of your thesis statement. If your notes are good, you've got credit to sources on there, you've got specific information, you don't have to go back to your sources. And that's why I say it's efficient. If your notes are good, you have a rough draft sitting in front of you on those note cards that's complete with credit to sources. And that's a real time saver. If your notes are not good and you just write some junk down because Mrs. Larson told you to, that's a waste of your time. And I'm really not looking to waste your time here. I'm looking to save you time and help you manage your time. Oops, and I just went too fast. You always want to have your thesis statement in front of you. And you want to, before you really settle into your note taking, you want to make sure your thesis statement is good. That's why I had you do the annotated bibliography. And that's why I want to just make sure that you have that solid thesis before you even settle in. So if you haven't talked to me about your thesis statement, that's something you definitely want to take care of. The thesis statement keeps you focused, right? Because it tells you exactly what your paper is going to be about. And it helps to guide your note taking because you only take notes that support your thesis. So when you come across ideas in your sources that don't have anything to do with your thesis statement, there's no need to write them down. So it keeps you focused, helps guide your note taking, and because your thesis statement lays out how your paper will be organized, that will help you to organize your notes when you're done gathering your information. What happens first? You take out a note card, and again, if you don't have note cards, slips of paper will do, and you credit the source right away. The research report is the paper where I see the most cases of plagiarism, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One is because it's hard and people panic, and that's where plagiarism comes from sometimes when good people make poor choices. Another reason is that people put off crediting their source. I hear this all the time. I was going to do it later. I'll credit my sources later. Later never comes, and we don't really have time for later. So I suggest you credit your sources immediately. And you do that by putting the author's name on the card before you write anything else. This gives you a ready-to-go in-text citation, and it keeps you from plagiarizing. It's a reminder that when you put that idea into your paper, you have to credit the source. Because you've done that, you won't have to go back to your sources and try to figure out which information came from which source, which is difficult, frustrating, and time-consuming. So let's avoid that by putting credit to the source first thing on each card. It'll look like this. MLA format says that in a parenthetical citation, you put the author's last name and the page number. Well, you won't always have page numbers. Modern sources often come from the internet and often do not have page numbers. So the first example on the screen shows what it would look like if you had an author and a page number. The second example shows what it looks like if you have no page number, just the author's last name. And the third example shows what it would look like if you didn't have an author for the source. You would use the first thing in the works cited entry, and that might be the title of the article. So notice I have it in quotation marks to show it's a title. I only need the first word unless it's a little word like or the, and I put that in my in-text citation to credit my source. That will match up with what comes first on my works cited slide, so on my works cited page. This is how I start each note card. Then I put one idea on every card. And by one idea, I mean a complete sentence, the actual words that I want to use in my paper. I don't write things like look up a statistic or find a story to fit here or choose one of the quotes from source number 1. That's all wasted time when you do that. Instead, I write the exact thing. I write the exact words I want to put in my report. Now, can I change them later? Of course I can, but later is kind of difficult. We don't have much of that, so best to get it right now. So I paraphrase, I put the idea exactly as I want to put it in my report, and I credit the source. Once again, putting one idea on each card gives me the chance to physically move those cards around and to organize ideas. And I can't emphasize enough the need to paraphrase. Once again, I'll say that the research report is where I see the most instances of plagiarism. And you don't want to end up failing because of that. That's just no way to go. So, put ideas into your own words. And that means more than just changing a word here or there or slightly rearranging the sentence. Look at the idea, find the idea you want to use in your paper, look away from the source, close the source, walk away from the source, whatever it takes so you don't copy it, and put that idea in your own words. You don't change the meaning, but you put it into your own voice. That's what paraphrasing is all about. And once again, I'll remind you that you have to credit the source because it wasn't your idea. It wasn't your idea. They're your words, but you didn't make up that idea. Quotes are okay. And in fact, quotes are very good, but I don't want you to use very many, and that's why the first bullet on this slide says 1 to 3 short quotes. I don't want you to use long quotes at all, and I don't use them in my writing ever. They get in the way and they lead to plagiarism. So 1 to 3 short quotes. You find something in your source that comes from someone who is wise or who is well known or who is an expert, or you just find something that is well said and you might want to use that as a quote. So you get it exactly right, put it in quotation marks, and always credit the source. So 1 to 3 short quotes is really good in a paper of this length. More than that, and then you look at possible plagiarism issues. You don't want your percentage at Turnitin.com to be over 15%. And 1 to 3 short quotes is pretty safe for that. This is an example of what a note card should look like. Notice that I put the author's last name on there. I put it in parentheses just because to me that looks like a parenthetical citation and it's just a reminder to credit my source, but you wouldn't have to have the parentheses. Then I took an idea from this source and paraphrased it. So that idea is totally in my own words and it's ready to go into my paper. I mean, look at it. It's a complete sentence. It's specific. It's ready to go. This card shows what I would do for a quote, and notice it's nice and short. This came from a source that didn't have an author, so I put the first word of the title in the quotation marks. Notice, oh yeah, I'm sorry, in quotation marks, in the parentheses. So notice that I use quotation marks to show that it's a title. And I got the quote exactly word for word from that source, and I put the quote in quotation marks. Quotation marks literally mean this material was taken word for word. And it doesn't have to be in quotation marks in the source for you to quote it, all right? Anything you see that you like those words and you think they'll make your paper sound more intelligent or whatever, you can use it and put it in quotation marks. It doesn't already have to be in quotation marks. But just use a few, use short ones, and when you put a quote in your paper, make sure you fit it in logically. So you don't just drop it in there and go on with the paper. You introduce the quote, a signal phrase is a great way to do that, and then you explain how it fits in with the rest of the paper and how it supports your thesis statement. So this is a review of what I covered. I talked about why you should use note cards so you can logically organize your ideas using one idea per card. I gave you examples of what each card should look like, and I pointed out the real value of having good notes, which means that you have a rough draft of your report ready to go and you don't have to go back to your sources. This final slide is the works cited entries that I used for the 2 sample note cards. And what I wanted to do with this slide is talk you through these entries. A lot of people struggle with what goes into the works cited. And when you look in your textbook, if you have your textbook, page 456 shows you how to do a works cited entry for an article from a website. But I'm going to talk you through it just like I did for the analysis essay, just so you have that information. So the first source starts with the author's last name, a comma, and then her first name, followed by a period. What you see next is the title of the article, and that is in quotation marks. There's a period inside the quotation marks. What you see next is the website title. Website titles are italicized. What you see next is the publisher of the website, and I found that by scrolling clear to the bottom of my page and looking for the copyright symbol. Sometimes you won't have a publisher, and if you don't have it, you just leave it out. Just like if you don't have an author, you just leave that out. Next is the date of publication. After that is the URL, and there's a period at the end. And one thing I'll point out that in PowerPoint, sometimes the formatting gets a little bit messed up, so your formatting won't look exactly like mine, but that's all of the information that goes in. The next source, very similar, but it doesn't have an author, so I started with the title of the article, and it didn't have a date of publication, so I had to say accessed 15 April 2020. So if you don't have a date of publication, you put the date of access at the end. That's how you do your works cited entries. Remember, if you're using the online library, it will cite for you. You use the cite feature, copy and paste. That's the way to go because those entries are different from entries from a regular website. As always, you should definitely let me know if you have questions. Best of luck with your research report.